Beer Edge is excited to announce a partnership with Pro Brewer that will bring original articles to probrewer.com twice a week, covering issues important to the beer industry and aimed at helping breweries of all sizes understand different facets of the business. Check out our articles on probrewer.com every Tuesday and Thursday, and visit the site daily for other original content and to stay connected with the beer industry. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl. Great Lakes Brewing is one of the oldest and most established breweries in the country, with a business built on tradition. But they're also working to keep up with the times and finding balance with trends. This week, a conversation with their brewmaster and their brand coordinator, and that comes up in a moment. But first, we're able to bring you this show each week thanks to the support of the companies that are committed to independent journalism in the beer space. If you'd like to learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates, please reach out to sponsor@beeredge.com. And with that in mind, I hope you'll check out Stomp Stickers. Stomp is a proud member of the Brewers Association that produces a wide variety of printed brewery products, such as beer labels, keg collars, coasters, beer boxes, and much more. Stomp's website features an easy-to-use design tool, low quantity orders, fast turnaround times, and free domestic shipping. Visit stompstickers.com and use code CRAFTBEER15 for 15% off your first order. We're also brought to you by NZ Hops, a cooperative of master growers, whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years with creativity and passion to produce some of the world's finest hops. With a dedicated hop breeding program and farming knowledge handed down through the generations, the current-day master growers proudly provide 18 unique New Zealand hop varieties to the world. Visit nzhops.co.nz or find them on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at NZHops Ltd to learn more. When you think about Great Lakes Brewing, Edmund Fitzgerald Porter likely comes to mind. It's the flagship beer of a brewery that has helped shape craft beer in America and has fostered the career of many in the industries. This week, I'm joined by Mark Hunger. He's the brewmaster, and I'm also joined by Michael Williams. He's the brand coordinator who works in the brewery's marketing department. We're going to be talking about history and the future, recipe development, flavors, and shifting consumer tastes. And I start off by asking Mark, who's been around since almost the beginning of this Ohio-based brewery, about his title and how it all came about. Here's our conversation.
Like I said, when I started here, nobody really had a title, honestly, except the one person who happened to be the brewmaster at the time, probably.
Right.
Outside of that, you were a brewery worker. I started in quality control, which is critical. When I started here, nobody had a science background here, and half or more of brewing is science. Managing yeast, managing the chemistry of the beer, so on and so forth. So that was a pretty big aspect, I think, that I brought here. Not to be high on myself, but like I said, nobody else really had any experience. And then as I worked here, related that to brewing, went to Siebel Institute Brewing School in Chicago, took some brewing quality control classes to relate what I knew about science to beer, which was pretty cool. And then throughout that whole time I was brewing, worked on the pub system a little bit, formulating some recipes, so on and so forth. And just throughout those years, first 9 years that I worked here, just had a lot of time in all areas of producing beer. So when the position opened, it was sort of I don't want to say it was a natural progression, but I had a lot of experience in all areas, but my heart and soul, and the owners knew this too, was to produce quality beer, because I had that backbone in QC. So that's sort of how I fell into the role. And when I took on the role in 2006, interestingly enough, it was not, I didn't have the title the sacred title of brewmaster per se. It was manager of brewing and quality control. One of the reasons behind that was a fellow by the name of Thane Johnson, who was a retired brewmaster, but worked with the Conway brothers to actually build up the brewery as a consultant. Super nice guy. At that, he was in his 70s at that time. And he was the brewmaster of Schmitz, and Great Lakes gave him, or he had the technical title of master brewer. So they essentially didn't want anybody else, I don't think, with a brewmaster or master brewer title, which was totally fine to me because Thane was the best guy in the world. I forget if this was before or after he passed, and eventually my title became brewmaster, but the duties didn't change whatsoever. It was the same job, just different title. So,
do you remember going back to the beginning of your career when you were in the pub mashing in for the first time? Do you remember what that beer was?
Absolutely, I do. The first time in training, it was a Dortmunder, but the very first beer I brewed professionally solo, which was literally like a week and a half after I started, was a Rockefeller Bock.
Oh, yeah.
Bock beer.
Rockefeller Bock. Is that something that you all still make?
It was a Doppelbock. It's gone through a couple name changes.
Yeah. We did that as the Doppelrock, I think, a couple years, like 5-6 years ago. And then it's been a pub beer. But man, that's a good beer. I love that beer.
Yeah. That was the very first beer I made. And it's actually, I'm a huge lager guy, drink a lot of Elliott Ness. So I like those, darker full body lagers. To this day, I think it's one of our absolute best beers.
Sure. It's the mother's milk, right, Mark?
Exactly.
Elliott Ness. Yep.
Well, I mean, that's usually something that you would call a stout, the mother's milk. In what context, Michael, are you saying that's is it the cash cow of the brewery?
It is not. It's one of our first two beers. So that and the Dortmunder Gold were our first two beers. But, in today's context, we're like a lot of the rest of packaging breweries in that we've moved more towards hops. But Mark, that's kind of your nickname for Elliott Ness. Does that go back to Thane too, the mother's milk thing?
Thane called Dortmunder that because that was his beer. He loved that beer.
And Ness is yours.
Yeah, Elliott Ness is one of my favorites.
Yeah. It's just a term of affection for not using it in its most technical sense, John, I suppose.
Okay. That's pretty good to know. It's interesting that you bring up a shift towards hops because I've had some of the IPAs that you all have put out over the years. But it's I think probably impossible for somebody to mention your brewery who knows beer, who doesn't almost immediately think of Edmund Fitzgerald Porter. Is that fair?
I think so. That, and of course the Christmas ale, which is the seasonal favorite the last 2 months of the year. But yeah, when it comes to, like those revered classic examples of classic styles, Fitz is pretty much it. I'm sipping on one right now. Did you find that bottle in the back of your fridge?
I did. Nice. Revered though. I mean, so Mark, when you are the brewmaster of a brewery that has a revered beer, and Michael, I know marketing is your thing. So, you're going to toss out lofty words, but I'd actually agree with you on that.
Sure. I say that as a beer nerd too, by the way.
Yeah, it's the official beer nerd designation as opposed to, in addition to approved copy.
Yes, exactly.
But Mark, when words like that are tossed around beers that you're ultimately responsible for, what is the weight like on a brewer's shoulders for something like that?
Obviously it has some significance. What do you mean by it? Well, wait for that particular brand.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you have people who regularly buy it, who know that beer like the back of their hands, who have, supported the brewery through the purchase of that beer for so many years. I mean, there's only so much you can do to change it around or freshen it up. Or
Sure.
We've seen other breweries, take their flagships, take their beloved beers and try to, make line extensions out of it, which sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think for a beer like Edmund Fitzgerald Porter, there's got to be a personal connection that a lot of drinkers feel.
Sure.
That you have to then, as a brewer, I'm assuming here, you have to meet those expectations regularly, sure, over and over again. And I'm just sort of curious as to, what's that like from your standpoint?
Having a quality background like I do, I treat consistency and quality with the utmost respect. And I revere all of our brands, really. Obviously, Edmund Fitzgerald is the most awarded. I myself walked across the stage at the GABF to get a medal for it, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
And
that's awesome.
In terms of reverence for the beer, it's the one beer, and I put a lot of clout behind this, that if I talk to other brewers, they're sure to bring up, which to me means a lot. And but in terms of, as I treat it as a brewmaster, as a quality control person, it's right up there with everything else that we make. I don't necessarily treat anything above anything else. My ultimate goal is to make the highest quality Edmund Fitzgerald and the highest quality Dortmunder and the highest quality every other beer we make. But in terms of the reverence for the beer, I put that it definitely has it on its shoulders, because like I said, in terms of peer recognition, it is pretty incredible. Way back in the day, when we did our 25th anniversary, we did a collaboration with the Shoots Brewery out in Oregon. Mm-hmm. And we did it with Edmund Fitzgerald. It was a porter-based.
Black Butte and Edmund. Yeah, I remember that year.
Exactly. Yeah,
it was a porter-based collaboration. It wasn't Edmund Fitzgerald, but one of the main drivers behind that is because they have that Black Butte Porter, and mm-hmm. we have Edmund Fitzgerald, and they're both classic beers that we make. So we thought we did a collaboration, made a porter. So it was a great experience.
That was great.
Can you walk me through that? Because porter being such a classic style, having an established guidelines and established recipe, if you're making a porter with the Shoots of all places, which also knows how to make great porters going back to the John Harris days, how did you guys approach that? Like, was it, hey, we've always been wanting to try, Citra? Or I know you guys didn't do that, but how do two porter breweries approach making a porter for a special occasion?
It was fun. Sat down and talked with brewmasters there and brewers here, and talked about what we liked in a porter, talked about our particular beers that we make, and then what we would, if we could come up with a brand new porter, what would we do differently, or what could we, dress it up with or get a little crazy with. Right. And we sort of took it from there and made a beer with some Muscovado sugar. And
That's right.
Yeah, it was a good beer. Little smoked malt imperial, because it was what was it, imperial smoked porter, I believe.
Yeah. We barrel aged a little bit of that too.
Yeah, and so there wasn't a flavor that was over the top. So we just really had a fun time with it, and really it was very much we did trial batches of it and sent samples back and forth to try, and we really nailed down what we wanted. It was not like the modern day collaborations where you practically sometimes meet up the day on brew day and come up with something. This was like a beer that we developed over the course of like 3 or 4 months with like several trial batches and stuff like that. So,
but that also probably speaks to the nature of the collaboration. Like if, again, two porter breweries are going to get together, you guys just can't slap something together because it could ultimately hurt your two core brands.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is a bullshit porter. These guys don't know how to make porter anymore.
We should.
Yeah, it was probably the most serious collaboration I've ever been involved with, and but one of the funnest collaborations I've ever been involved with.
Yeah,
Michael, I want to jump back to you because you spent time in the pub, giving tours, interacting with the public a lot, and I always get a kick out of being at a brewery and seeing like real fans walk through. And usually the older the brand, the more excitement there is, especially for first-time visitors. Are there interactions that you had back in that phase of your career that stand out, that really sort of show, I don't know, the impact that Great Lakes has had?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when I was serving, so that would have been 2012 through 2015, we were like a lot of other brewers our size at that time, early 2010s. It was all, rosy futures up 15, 20% a year and stuff. And the things were just going totally nuts here. And this was like, it's crazy because it's only 10 years ago, right? But like, there are, I think, 10 breweries in our neighborhood now. Ohio City in downtown Cleveland is kind of like the brewing district for Cleveland. But man, in 2012, I think it was just Market Garden across the street. So like, if you're a beer fan and you came to Cleveland, like you were going to Great Lakes, that was where you were going. There's no question about it. Right. So that was a really cool experience while I was on the floor, and, people were so excited to try the beers brewery fresh. They may have been traveling from Buffalo or Chicago or Cincy or wherever. Right. And I always thought of it like a pilgrimage. Right. And as a big beer fan myself, for like, when I go out of state and visit the breweries I'm really passionate about it, I always think about it like a pilgrimage. And that's kind of how it felt for a lot of guests in the pub. And then especially when I was given tours and people got to see those, they would walk into the brew house where the Mark watches over every day, and like their minds would just be totally blown seeing these 75 barrel, the 75 barrel brew house. And I tell them, we're a large brewer compared to like the mom and pop place down the street. They don't know that the AV plant down 71 in Columbus is doing vastly more than we are. But
yeah.
So yeah, it was just really cool, and being a 30-plus-year-old brewer, people of all ages just like, coming here and falling in love with the brewery again, just because we're hanging out and having beers, it's really fun.
But so 10 years now have passed since then, and 9,000 breweries in the country, and pandemic aside, in conversations with other legacy craft brewers at this point, the ones who have been around for 30 years or so, it can be hard to capture new eyeballs, or even old eyeballs, when there's so much choice that's out there these days. What have you all been doing to stay part of the conversation, to stay relevant in the conversation?
Yeah, that's huge for us. And that's huge for us from the brewery campus experience, if you will, which obviously has been tough regardless the past 2 years. And we're finally starting to kind of get back on our feet fully with that. But then when it comes to like the beers that Mark and his team are brewing in the production facility, we still make all the classics that we've already kind of talked about, right? Your Dortmunder and Eddie Fitz and Commodore Perry and all that. But we have kind of, we love our longtime audience, and we got to keep them, right? And my goodness, if we we didn't make some of those classic beers anymore, I'd be like, well, no, I can't. Where am I going to find a lager, right? Thankfully, more craft lagers are coming around, but they're not a lot you can just pick up in a 6-pack, right? So, but now we're doing more, styles that are just household names from the past 5 years, like hazy IPA, and we have a wheat beer with citrus that happens to be low calorie and all that. So kind of attracting some newer eyes that way, like you were saying, right? With just the newer, I don't call them flashy, because these are enduring styles, they're just new.
Yeah.
And it pumps me up, like talking to people about those and tasting those, because as a traditional brewer, which we're really proud to make those traditional styles, I think people kind of like started to see us as like, we've been around for a long time, and a lot of our fans are older and stuff, but we can do all the newer stuff too, right?
So but I guess that's what I was getting at, is how are you having those conversations? Like, how do you convince somebody who thinks that you guys are the old Porter brewery that they should be trying your hazy IPA? Because right. it is so vastly different.
It is, and it's not triple dry hopped with Galaxy and $20 a 4-pack or anything.
Well, then you guys shouldn't even be part of this conversation if you're not doing that. My God,
I was gonna say the
you guys are doing it wrong. I don't mean to give you business advice, but
I've had this in the back of my head since we were talking about the collab. But you said something about Citra, and I'm like, dude, if we had just double dry hopped the porter with Citra, we would have sold 3 times as much, But yeah, it's. I mean, it's tough.
Poor Mark just wants to leave now. Mark's like, no, we're not going to double dry hop our
Mark is not going to let me anywhere near the brewery again. So not that I do anything other than talk. Not that I do anything but talk in there anyways. But yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, right? It's not easy, and it's just one of those things where it's like, from my perspective, especially as someone who like speaks at the public a lot. It's really repetition, and as an educator too, right? It's almost just like kind of like education. It's like you repeat this message that is true about us, kind of over and over again, and in different ways for different audiences, right? And over time, people just kind of start to get it, and that experience of coming down here and trying. Like when I do a class, I'll do a class. I just did one on IPAs down here, so talked about all 4 of the core IPAs. And some people probably came down there because they're like, I'm learning all about Commodore Perry, which has been around since 92, right?
Yeah. But
then they tried Haze Craft or Tropicoastal, the newer IPAs, and like, oh, okay. And just driving trial and stuff that way. So, but it's not easy. That's for sure. Yeah.
Mark, getting back into the brew house, when word comes down, when decisions are made saying, all right, this is how the beer industry is going right now. It's hazy IPAs. It's, I see you guys are doing hard seltzers as well, or ranch water.
Oh yeah.
As all of these things started to happen around the beer world, and that's where the conversation was going. And you said, okay, like we're going to have to do tropical IPAs. We're going to have to, bring some haze to our tap lines. That's not a Hefeweizen. Where did those conversations start? Because I can't imagine it was like fully natural for you guys.
Right. Well, you're this day and age, you always have one eye out for what's coming out, and you gotta be able to innovate and see what's trending. And stuff like that. We have a meeting every couple of weeks, product portfolio development meeting, and one of our head of sales is there and marketing, and they're constantly bringing up. Not that as a brewer we don't have an idea, bringing up stuff that's trending and hot out there. So inevitably, you gotta. If there's a particular style that's hot and it's growing, and you gotta be flexible, you gotta be innovative, and you gotta be able to change to the growing styles. So all
right. So then let me just use Haze Craft as an example then, since that's your hazy offering. How'd you guys build that recipe?
We did several batches on our pub over a couple of years. And then, that obviously they sold well at the pub. And then it was determined, hey, we're going to have to make one for package, or want to make one for package. And we have a pilot system in the brewery, a little 2-barrel pilot system that is sort of emulates our production plant, our production brew house. And we started developing one on there. I'd have to say, not, purposely brewing a hazy IPA before. It was a learning experience, because it was sort of an area that we hadn't really had too much familiarity with. So it was a learning experience, and I think we got a good one now. But we definitely had some batches that were not the greatest, and had to change them and came out with what we have.
Because ultimately, I mean, you want it to taste good because then it'll sell well. But for those batches that didn't work out, do you recall what it was about them? Was it just like ratios were off, or was it just not tasting right to you guys? Because I imagine there's got to be some desire, even if you're not going to be pouring these in your glass all the time, that you're going to want to drink a pint of this when it comes out. So like
sure.
In-house flavor has to, or in-house preferences have to be reflective of the brewery. But what was off with some of those, and how'd you fix it?
Well, hazy
or address it.
Hazy IPA. It's sort of there's two facets to it. You have the hop profile, and then you have the physical appearance, the haze profile. So sometimes our hops would be on, but the haze, it was fall totally clear, and we didn't have any haze. So it was sort of a balancing act between the two. And I'd have to say, we're pretty familiar with hops, and we tried some different hops, and we were able to, I think, nail the hop thing down pretty quickly. But it was the whole, the protein haze, and to keep the haze suspended was something we were unfamiliar with. Obviously knew something about it, but something that we have not purposely worked for in a beer like that. So that took utilizing some different malts, some different ingredients, and stuff like that, some different procedures that we'd never done before. And it was definitely some trial and error. So the malt, the haze aspect was a lot more difficult than the hops.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I remember some of those early batches, and I willingly volunteer myself for helping us do R&D for our products, right? So one of my favorite things is when we're coming out with a new beer and we throw the first batch on in the pub, and then I kind of think about it and taste, and then we get the next batch, and we successively, we did, I think, half a dozen batches for Hazecraft. We did at least 10 for Crushworthy, the Citrus Sweet. And just having that aha moment, right? When we finally nail it, it's a really cool thing, seeing the growth of a beer throughout its infancy, right?
Has there been anything, or actually, let me just go back. So how'd you solve the malt problem?
A lot of it was trial and error, asking advice from some other brewers, which I got some, good advice from a few people. And then it was, trial batches, really trial and error, and seeing how it performed. Definitely a learning experience too. Definitely learned some stuff for sure.
Yeah.
We're going to have more in just a moment. But first, thanks to these companies who support Drink Beer, Think Beer, and help keep it on the air. Stump Stickers is a reliable resource for printed items, such as beer labels and boxes, keg collars, coasters, and more. Visit stumpstickers.com and use code CRAFTBEER15 for 15% off of your first order. And we're also brought to you by NZ Hops, a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years to produce some of the world's finest hops. NZ Hops are like no others, unique in their flavors and aromas. Visit nzhops.co.nz to explore more. And now, back to the conversation. One of the cool things about your brewery is having the pub as well as, you know, the big production brewery as well, because you can use the pub to sort of test consumer flavors or preferences.
Yeah, very true.
Has there been a beer or beers over the years that was done at the pub, maybe as the intention of a one-off, that the popularity necessitated that it needed to go into full production?
Man, I'm sure there was. Trying to think.
Yeah, we have so many that are like, the tough thing about for us going from a 7-barrel brew pub system to a 130,000 barrel distribution model is like, we have, I can say a minimum half a dozen beers that we get, the messages every day about whether it's through the company email or social or stuff like Rye the Tiger, the Rye IPA, Alberta Clipper, the Chocolate Raspberry Porter.
Rye the Tiger was definitely one that developed at the pub and made its way to package.
And a lot of those, like, they do just well enough to be in package for a little bit, but they never quite go all the way and stay. I don't think there's one in the lineup right now that was truly just like a brew pub beer that truly blew up. But we have, if we could make small batches and just get it to those people, we'd make a lot of people happy.
There's definitely some style. Some of our offerings started in the pub. Oatmeal stout, that was done in the pub. That's pretty straightforward. But still, that used to be a pub only thing. Nosferatu.
Sure.
Oh, I remember that beer. Yeah.
Yeah. We have that in package.
So
it's in our rotation. That was in the pub. Lake Erie Monster. That was a pub only beer for a while.
Yeah. Mark has a slightly better perspective than me, having been here for like 25 years as opposed to me.
When you think about beers, though, that you want to get out into the marketplace, hazy IPA, I guess, would make sense. But you also have to, I imagine, find diversity and balance so that you're not cannibalizing off of some of the other beers or any of the other beers that you have out there. Like, you guys putting out a regular stout would probably just confuse people who are already drinking your porter, right?
Right. You got to, unfortunately, some of that happens. We put out another IPA. It might take a little bit from one of our other IPAs that we currently have in package. But now we came out with our Crushworthy low-cal citrus wheat. I truly think that's bringing in some new drinkers. I don't think that's really cannibalizing from another style because it's pretty different from others. But if you come up with another IPA, whether it's hazy or regular, any IPA, it's going to have some effect. And we see that. We definitely see that.
Yeah. But then the overall bucket grows, right? So Perry might be down a little bit, but the overall IPA bucket's a little bigger.
Yeah. You come out with an IPA, you get, I don't know, 10,000 cases and Perry's down 500 and, you get cumulative growth.
I guess the reason I brought that up was I was walking through the store last week and I saw, because it is that time of year as we're in late February, the familiar Conway's Irish Ale. Nice. And it occurred to me in that moment as I was sort of staring at it for just a second on the shelf of, well, you guys can't put out a stout this time of year because of the porter. I mean, maybe you could, but going different from the expected norm of mid-March, I imagine has had some dividends over the years because you guys already have a dark beer on regular rotation. But having an Irish beer or an Irish themed beer that's not a stout has to grab some attention.
I think so. Yeah, and for that one too, I mean, Conway's for us is so big because, in part, because of the story behind it, right? Pat and Dan Conway are the co-owners, and the gent on the label for that one is Pa Conway, their grandfather, and he was a traffic officer about maybe a mile from the brewery, pretty close to downtown Cleveland. So that's the beer certainly on its own, and the fact that it's a little different, right? It's not a dry stout, it's not a Guinness type or whatever, but we're a regional brewer and all that, but at the core, we're also really Cleveland, and that Conway's story really touches so many people's hearts here in town. So,
I mean, is that true? Like, do the stories actually penetrate, or is it the flavor of the beer at the end of the day, or is it a combination of both?
Definitely a combination.
Yeah, okay. A combination, and especially naturally, the further out you go, like, I mean, when you were walking down that grocery store aisle, like you wouldn't pull someone aside and say, "Hey, look, it's Pa Conway, the owner, the grandfather of Great Lakes co-owners." Like they'd be like, "Great Lakes, Cleveland, Ohio, the West," But for us here in town, that's the Conways know a lot of people. A lot of people have managed to get to know Pat and Dan, so that story definitely does resonate. But if the liquid going in the bottle or can, wasn't the high quality stuff that Mark was putting out, then it doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Mark, there's Irish Red or Irish Ale or, whatever. I think a lot of drinkers of a certain age are going to remember George Killian. I don't even know if that's still being made by Coors or not. But it is one of those styles where it pops up this time of year, or it's talked about a little bit this time of year. I guess you guys sort of lead that conversation, and then largely forgotten about. And I'm speaking in generalities, but for the rest of the year, for those who are younger or uninitiated into what a proper Irish Ale, Irish Red should taste like, can you walk us through what you believe that style should represent?
What I believe, and this isn't gone by any BJCP guidelines or anything.
Oh, perfect. I'd be disappointed if it was.
Yeah. First and foremost, a beer like that should be, it's going to have a strong malt background, typically like a crystal malt. It's going to have, you're going to be able to taste the malt. The hops will complement the malt. They're not going to be overpowering. So you're going to want to smell the malt as well as taste it. And then, like I say, the hops are just going to complement that. And it should be a drinkable beer. It's not going to be something like, a super high powered stout or something like that, because let's face it, St. Patrick's Day, you're going to have festive things going on. It's going to be a time when you'd want a sessionable beer that you can drink several of and not just be overpowered with one or two. So the hops we use are fairly mild hops. So like I said before, they're going to complement, they're not going to overpower. And then it's 2-row malt, crystal malt. That's going to give a nice malty backbone to it. It's pretty straightforward beer. It really is. It's not complicated.
Is there a case to be made for non-complicated beer these days, Mark?
Absolutely.
Yes, please.
There are so many brewers out there that make the most complicated recipes and complicated beers. And they miss the fact of the fundamentals of brewing. I always say, we get people in here, workers, new hires, whatever, first day on the job and showing them around, showing them the ropes, so to speak. And I'll tell them, being a brewer is not all malt and hops. Being a brewer is you're a glorified janitor, because if you don't have a clean brewery, you're not going to make good beer, no matter how complicated the recipe is. So I think a lot of people, and just like whoever you're talking about with exploding cans, I wouldn't.
Before we started recording, we were
they're missing,
lamenting shelf stable beers. Yeah,
right. They're missing the fundamentals. Like our Dortmunder is a very, I'm not going to go through the recipe, but I talk to people about it and they're like, that's it. It's pretty straightforward. Of course, we have our lager yeast that adds a lot of character to it, but you don't have to have a super complicated recipe to make a pretty complex, great beer.
Yeah.
So Michael, when you're doing education now for the brewery and you're out there, so many of the younger beer drinkers that come up, and I know I'm sounding like the old Gen Xer now, but like Gen Z these days, when they're coming into the scene, but like all what they've experienced from the beginning is hazies or things that have gummy bears in them, or all lactose everything and everything else in between. What is your job like, or what is your mission like when you're like, hey, try this porter based on a historic recipe, or, here is, a Dortmunder, or here is, Commodore Perry, which has bitterness and you can see through.
That's right. This unusual, that's not an IPA. What are you talking about?
Right. But I mean, but that's true. Or, or that's the IPA that my grandfather suffered through, because of all of the bitterness. How do you approach that? Is there a path forward to bring younger beer drinkers back to classic recipes? Because there has been so much change and so much innovation.
Yeah, I think there can be. So I'm the in-between between X and Z, right? I'm a millennial, and as I mentioned before, in addition to being our educator and stuff, I'm just a big beer nerd. And I love and revere the classics. And I also really dig some of the crazy new stuff that, my buddies around town and the small tap rooms are making. So like having that for me personally, as an educator, like already having that passion for both helps a lot right there. I love a good pastry stout, and not something I'm going to drink every day, but I can relate. Right. And then I think it kind of goes back to the storytelling that we were dipping into with Conway's too. I really love the history behind these styles. And when you kind of trace, when I teach my IPA class, I actually start with hazies and then work back. And I think people are really captivated by seeing, this is of course limited audiences, right? So it's tough to do this for 10,000 people at a time, but you can get people in a room and tell that story of beer itself, right? And like, it's a living thing, it's a growing thing, just like we all are. And trace that history back from where we are today with hazy, and see there, even though it looks different and tastes different, there are a lot of shared processes and obviously ingredients and all that. And I think people they really enjoy seeing that. That's part of the allure of going to a class or watching a tasting live, on Facebook or whatever. You get that story, you get enchanted. And once you understand why older things are the way they are, I think that kind of opens that door, right, for people to go back and they try it and they kind of get it, right? Like, and when I'm talking about bitterness, it's because you're bringing up the bitterness for Commodore Perry, I'll ask people, do you like black coffee? Or do you like, use analogies, right? Do you like hot sauce? All these learned tastes that we didn't like when we were kids, but you learn to appreciate them and see their complexities the more you taste them and grow and all that. So, yeah.
Mark, is there a style of beer that you wish was talked about more or got more respect among beer drinkers?
I think the style is starting to get a little more respect. Lagers and, classic lagers. We obviously started off as a lager brewery. And I think it's starting to get more respect in the craft world. A lot of craft breweries, I feel, were almost afraid to make lagers. It's so complex or something. I don't know. They're starting to make more of them now. And I think it's getting more respect now, which is good to see.
What about you, Michael? Is there a style that you'd love to see get a little bit more respect?
Yeah. I'm glad that lagers are coming back. And I know you guys, John, you and your crew are big lager fans with the Pils and Rauch beer and all that. Mark, you want to make a Rauch beer in the pub with Steve Foreman? Make John a happy person.
We've made one before.
Yeah. No, John's
look at you pandering. I love it.
Know. I got a pander, dude.
I love the pander. The group appreciates it.
Hey, exactly. We got to give you some love, right? Boost those numbers.
Well, thank you.
But I would love, I don't know. I just had some goose like a couple days ago. We were just down in Florida for vacation. Came back and kind of as a celebratory, like last beer before going back to work, I just popped open a goose, Armand and Gaston. And I was just like, man, I know this is the least likely beer style to ever make a big comeback that I'm talking about right now, but it would be really cool if you saw some more wild fermentation like that. I know we got some American wilds out there, but like just old school goose and all that. Love them.
So I've been asking folks on the show if you could, the premise is my wife and I were rewatching The Good Place, and there's a whole part of the show where you can walk through a green door and be transported anytime, any place with anybody that you wanted. And so if such technology existed on this plane of existence, and Mark, you could finish this conversation and walk through a green door and be at any pub or any brewery with anybody that you wanted, where would you want to go? Who do you want to be with? Would be in your glass?
Wow. Man, I have to think about that one.
Michael, you want to jump in?
I can, because I'm a cheater and I listen to the show, so I knew you were going to ask that. So I've been reading the Silmarillion by Tolkien. And then, the background to Lord of the Rings and all that, and just a fascinating world. So to hang out in an English pub and have a pint of cask bitter and hang out with J.R.R. Tolkien would be pretty rad. And I promise I did not plan that in advance. That just came to me during the show.
All right. Mark, he bought you some time.
Yeah. Wow. I think hanging out at maybe Sierra Nevada in like 1981.
Yeah.
When they're developing Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. And even just being a fly on the wall there, I think that would be fascinating time to see that.
Okay. One more bonus question for you guys then. Is there something in the tanks at Great Lakes right now that has not seen the light of day that you're eager to get in front of people, that will soon be in front of people, that you're eager for them to taste?
I think so. Brewmaster, you got something in mind in particular?
Yeah. We've got a couple things in the works. We've got a variety pack for our Crushworthy low-cal wheat coming out, with some different flavors, with some different fruit purees. Watermelon is one, grapefruit and lemon lime, which
these all sound like traditional Great Lakes beers.
Yeah, really.
When I think of Great Lakes, I'm like, oh yeah, watermelon. Yeah,
watermelon.
Yeah, but it's this watermelon puree that we use, and it really tastes good.
Yeah, it's
so,
like hell or high watermelon-esque. That's my wife's.
It's innovation, man. You gotta change with the times.
Adapt or die.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm glad you guys are still out there and still making the classics and still pushing the envelope and still giving us a reason to look forward to St. Patrick's Day for something that is not a stout. So thanks for taking the time this week. Thanks for being on the show, and thanks for sharing insight of what's happening in Cleveland these days. I'm eager to get back there and hopefully hoist a pint with you both.
Sure. Let us know when you're here, John. We appreciate it.
As always, you can email me with guest suggestions, thoughts, or whatever's on your mind. My email is John Holl, that's JOHNHOLL @beeredge.com, or you can get with me on Twitter at John_Holl. Go check out beeredge.com for all of our This Week in Rauk Beer and Defend Pilsner merch, and make sure that you follow along on all of the various social medias at The Beer Edge. Of course, This Week in Rauk Beer is also online. The Facebook group is easy to search, and on Twitter and Instagram, it's at TW Rauk Beer. We're able to bring you this show each week thanks to the companies that want to support independent journalism in the beer space. If you'd like to learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates and ways to keep us on the air, please reach out to sponsor@beeredge.com. And be sure to check out these sponsors, including Stomp Stickers. Stomp is a proud member of the Brewers Association that produces a wide variety of printed brewery products, such as beer labels, keg collars, coasters, beer boxes, and much more. Stomp's website features an easy-to-use design tool, low quantity orders, fast turnaround times, and free domestic shipping. Visit stompstickers.com and use code CRAFTBEER15 for 15% off your first order. We're also brought to you by NZ Hops, a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years with creativity and passion to produce some of the world's finest hops. With a dedicated hop breeding program and farming knowledge handed down through the generations, the current day master growers proudly provide 18 unique New Zealand hop varieties to the world. Visit nzhops.co.nz, or you can find them on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at NZ Hops Ltd to learn more. As always, a reminder to check out the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch. Steal This Beer has new episodes on every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. On this show, Nate Schweber, he does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Holl. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.